DeShaun Tate back with you one more time. Appreciate everybody that have actually had the opportunity to join us on yesterday, which was really exciting. I tell people all the time, you never know exactly who you're going to get as a guest here on Tate's Take. Remind everybody, make sure that you follow along on the social media, all social media platforms at Tate's Take Hoops, of course, that being on Twitter as well as on Instagram. And be sure to tell everybody you know, mama, grandmama, friends, family, enemies, the whole nine, anywhere you find your favorite podcast, which I like to call the most entertaining, the most educational, and the most informational basketball content in the form of a podcast, that being Tate's Take right here. Of course, you know, hashtag where basketball lives, and also subscribe on the YouTube page as well, Tate's Take. Got a really awesome guest for you guys here today. And I know that I've been kind of teasing this quite a bit. I teased it on yesterday when I brought on Jared Greenberg to talk about some stuff inside the bubble. And I said, you know what? There has definitely been more than enough. And I know it's a basketball podcast, so not everybody go all crazy on me, but we're definitely going to get into some football because there's been huge news. And what other person to bring in to talk about some of the huge news in college football, especially in regards to the way that it's infected and impacted by the Big Ten, none other than good buddy of mine and Michael DeCourcy, the college basketball columnist and studio analyst for sporting news, that is, and the Big Ten Network. Michael DeCourcy, how are you?
I'm great, DeShaun. How are you? Great to see you.
You as well. It's been a little while. I can't remember the last time I saw you. I want to say that it had to be one of those Champions Classic events. I want to say it was the one at the Madison Square Garden. I feel like that may have been the last time. And we've been talking about maybe doing this for a while and bringing you on. So I'm really, really excited, as I'm sure that our viewers and our listeners are, about having you on.
Yeah, I'm sure that it was up in New York. And, you know, I have a lot of thoughts about that because it was the beginning of what promised to be an exciting season. And I think our season in college basketball surpassed our expectations even. With the development of Dayton and Obi Toppin and what an incredible year Luka Garza had and San Diego State and all the cool stuff that happened, and then to have it crash down before we were able to gather together at the Final Four. I'm sure we would have had a chance to see each other in Atlanta, and that was among one of the many disappointments of not having March Madness.
It was, and I hate it, man, because it's like I've been waiting all this time. My goal and my dream was to be able to make every Final Four from 2015 on. And I was making everyone, of course, the one where I get a chance to save a little bit of money and keep some money in my pocket for once, because I'm here in Atlanta and have been for the last 15 years. I'm preparing for it to come here. And of course, something happens to where unfortunate set of circumstances, obviously, that we have no control over, kept that from happening. And I definitely want to get into some of the players specifically from the Big Ten that decided to withdraw their name from the NBA draft and return back to college, and even some that decided to forego their and sacrifice their collegiate experience, or not experience, but their opportunity to still play collegiately and go out to the NBA draft and hopefully hear their names called and fulfill their dreams. But I want to get into some of the football stuff first. I'll tell you right now, this is the first time, and of course, this is epic. Mike DeCourcy is coming on, the first time that I am not going to start the show off with talking about basketball on a basketball podcast and talk about some football. The Big Ten came down with the announcement on yesterday that they are deciding to postpone the season for now until the spring. So I definitely want to get your opinions and exactly what you think all came into that decision being made and coming down on yesterday.
Well, I think there's an extreme concern about the viability of continuing to compete or endeavoring to compete, I should say, with the pandemic still not abating anywhere in the U.S. I'm sure there are states that are in much better shape than they were 3-4 months ago. But when you look across the swath of the U.S., it's still a massive problem. And so the league decided with some of the information that they got from medical experts and with the fact that it isn't declining nationally, and they decided that the medical information suggested that it wasn't wise to go ahead and move forward in this circumstance, and to delay and perhaps stage a spring season. And it was a disappointment to a lot of people. The Nebraska people have been very upfront about their desire to compete. Ohio State has been very upfront about their desire to compete. Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh said on Monday, issued a statement that showed from a standpoint of testing and the decline in the number of positive tests that have happened within the Michigan football program indicates that there is an element of safety with being able to continually test, with establishing protocols that the athletes have to follow, or risk discipline. And I wrote about that on Monday, that I thought that you can make a strong case for the idea that athletes are actually safer relative to the virus if there is competition available to them than if the competition were removed and the incentive to follow those really strict protocols. Don't associate with your classmates in social situations. Don't go to parties. Don't go to bars. I mean, it's hard to do. I understand that. I was 20 once. It's been a while, but I was 21 once, whatever. I'm glad that when I went through those years that I didn't have to encounter any of this. I feel really badly for those who do. And so the athletes who did obey the requests of their athletic departments and their coaches to avoid those situations, I think there is an element of safety in that. And then if you remove the competition as an element, then the incentive to deny yourself the other social opportunities that your classmates in college are accepting, it goes away. And so I do think there's a case to be made for there being more safety in continuing to compete. Now, you have to be unbelievably vigilant. You have to test as often as possible. You have to be really safe and careful, and you have to be really on top of when you do have a positive case, making sure that person's isolated quickly, so that there aren't further spread. There isn't further spread, I should say. And so it's not an easy deal to go ahead and do it, and it's not an easy deal to tell several hundred athletes on your campus you're not competing in the fall, and we're crossing our fingers on whether or not you'll compete at all.
Like you said, it's not easy to deal. And, when you're thinking about this whole thing, it's so much different from the NBA, because you could take all these players, and while you might think that there's so many of them, you can put them in a bubble. When you have these football teams, I can't imagine how something like that would work, because you have close to about 100 guys out there from each individual team. And I'm not exactly sure how that would work. And I couldn't imagine that would be the case. And you said so many different things. I think there's so many different layers to the onion here. And I'm just kind of curious, in a situation where the Big Ten is saying we're not playing, the Pac-12 are saying we're not playing, at least immediately, that is anyways. They're going to postpone it. But then you have some others that are they're getting some pushback behind the SEC and Big 12 and maybe some other conferences and the decisions that they're going to make. And how will this impact that? And what kind of season could we potentially see? Like, could we actually see a football season this year start with certain conferences? Other conferences don't start later. Maybe you do or don't have the answers to these questions, but can something like that actually work and be successful to where we can make sense of having a national champion at the end?
Well, the national champion, first of all, the beauty of college football relative to the national championship in this circumstance is that it's always been kind of a ruse. I mean, it's never been truly legitimate. In the voting days, the poll days, back when I covered college football on a daily basis, through the Bowl Alliance and the BCS, and now on to the college football playoff, it's never been wholly legitimate. Until you have every team that is that at the very least that you have all the conference champions and some representation from the group of 5 conferences, your championship is what we used to call mythical. I still believe that. So the beauty of the college football playoff in this circumstance, if they choose to go forward with it, and obviously they have to have multiple conferences contest a season in order for them to go forward with it. But if they do, it can be somewhat the same as it has been. It just would not include members of the MAC and members of the Mountain West, and more pointedly, members of the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. They wouldn't be involved. It wouldn't be reasonable to Ohio State and to Oregon and those who think that they have championship ability. But to me, it wouldn't be any less legitimate, because I never granted that great legitimacy to the past iterations of the college football championship.
Like you said, and even going back to talking about, the times of the poll voting and the BCS, it almost seems like such an afterthought, or that was so long ago, almost as if that was way back when we were dealing with AOL dial-up, and as annoying as that almost was to an extent. But it's just kind of crazy to think about all of this, and this will be it for as far as the football portion of it. But it's just crazy to think, like, could we actually see, certain players that are deciding, hey, I know I play in the Big Ten, or I play in the Pac-12 or whatever, but you know what? I want to play football, and I want to play football immediately. Now, granted, I'm sure that they won't be granted immediate eligibility, but I want to go play football, so I'm going to transfer south. I don't know if we're looking at Justin Fields, maybe in a situation, I'm just bringing him up, hypothetically speaking, going from Ohio State now to his third institution to go play football immediately. I'm not really sure where that weighs out. And then, like you said before, there were so many conversations about about Nebraska specifically wanting to play football immediately. Does the Big Ten kind of loan them to a conference for a season? I can't see how that would necessarily make sense, but do they move over, or do they just have to deal with the decisions that the Big Ten has made?
Well, the first item in terms of transfers is I think that in a concrete circumstance, it would only be fair for an athlete who was at one of the schools that is postponing to be able to transfer. The problem lies in this. Let's say you're a star quarterback at Miami of Ohio, let's say, just using as an example, and you think that you could play at a school in the ACC, say. But what if you transfer and then all of a sudden the ACC cancels?
Right.
It seems like a lot of trouble to go through for something that isn't certain. We know that they are continuing to try to compete, but they are not guaranteed. They have not signed in blood to go ahead and compete. The SEC, Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, said on Monday that they are looking at the possibility of competing, that they want to compete, that they are looking at, and they're planning to compete. But the main thing is they're not making a decision not to compete until they absolutely have to, until they would be forced by whatever circumstance to make that decision. And that's the main point. So it's still quite possible that none of those conferences could compete. They're saying today that they want to go forward. But 6 days ago, well, now 7, but 6 days before they made their announcement to postpone, the Big Ten put out a conference schedule, a very imaginative and well-designed conference schedule that was abandoned in 6 days. So we just don't know whether or not it'd be wise for someone to change their entire circumstance to go and move to another school that might be in the same situation in a couple of weeks.
In closing, football-wise, it's so mind-boggling to think about all of this. Honestly, it really is, and there's so many pieces to it. What exactly do you think will be the end result that we will see? Will everybody kind of follow suit and end up waiting to play in the spring, or will there be starts at different times, or what do you think the end result will be, and that the best result would be?
Well, I think that what's going to end up happening, just to guess, I think that there will be leagues that contest a season. I do think that will happen in the fall. I don't know how many, but at this point, unless something really, and I'm talking about relative to the virus, as long as this is our, let's say, worst scenario, where we stand today is the worst it's going to get, as long as it doesn't become even more untenable than it is now, I think there will be leagues that contest a season in college football. And the FBS. I believe there will be smaller schools that contest football seasons as well at the lowest levels, NAIA Division III. I think you'll see some of those as well that do compete. As far as the spring, I'm very hopeful that those that have postponed into that window will compete because again, I think that testing should be better. That's one of the things the Pac-12 said in their announcement was that they believe that in advance of a spring season, they believe that rapid testing will be available. And rapid testing means not like you'll get a result tomorrow, the next day, the day after that, or the week after that, but you'll get a result today, so that it makes it much easier to make sure that everybody that walks through the door on the way to the football field to play football is negative. And once you can do that, you can pretty much contest any sport as long as you're willing to absorb whatever cost would be inherent in those rapid tests.
So me and Mike, of course, if it's okay for me to speak for you, keeping our fingers crossed that we will be able to see some football, hopefully sooner than later, in a safe fashion. If not nothing else, I've been trying to tell a couple of my buddies here in Atlanta who's going crazy over not having any football anytime soon for the foreseeable future, at least as of right now, and within finding solutions within. And I'm just kind of been throwing some shots as a basketball guy, kind of teasing them like, because all of this came down during my favorite time of the year being March Madness. And I was so disappointed, still licking my wounds, honestly, Mike, because of that. And so now I'm kind of teasing them now over Twitter and social media saying, hey, welcome to the party. Now you know how it feels, because they were so up in arms about, oh, I'm not worried about it. They'll have this thing figured out by the time football rolls around and so forth. And I'm like, don't be so sure. So as much as I want to see football and everything like that on the gridiron and the pigskin and the whole nine, I'm just throwing a little shade to them. Mike DeCourcy, college basketball columnist and studio analyst for Sporting News and the Big Ten Network, joining us here on Tate's Take, where basketball lives. I know it probably have seemed like it's where football lives, but we're going to get ready to probably transition now. Be sure to follow him on the Twitter at TSN Mike. That is at TSN Mike, MIKE. Moving over to the hardwood, 94 feet long, 50 feet wide, 22 feet and 1 1/4 inches out on the perimeter. And if that hoop, Mike, is 10 feet tall, I'm all for it. I'm all for the basketball stuff. With that being said, there's been some particular athletes and players, obviously, as the deadline for the withdrawal from the 2020 NBA draft has come upon us, I think, within the last week or two. There's some big name players within the conference that have decided to come back. I would imagine that Luka Garza is going to be preseason player of the year nationally. Aaron Henry from Michigan State decided to return. They've been in probably the hottest institution for college basketball in terms of recruiting over the summer. Kofi Coburn and Ayo Dosunmu from Illinois. What others are there that you've seen, and what exactly does some of these guys that have been mentioned to come back to college, what does that mean for their institutions in the event that there will be a college basketball season this year? Because I can only imagine them returning is going to make Brad Underwood and Tom Izzo and some others some very happy people.
Well, I think it'd be a real shame now after these young men did postpone professional opportunities for a year to not have a college basketball season. The NCAA has been very emphatic that they're going to stage the NCAA tournament next year. So I think that everybody that engages in Division I basketball, especially the high majors, need to be really aggressive about their planning for this season. Pac-12 has already said they will not contest any sport until after January 1. And so they would be somewhat excluded from what I'm going to suggest. But I think everyone else has to consider the possibility. Now, if you look around the country at schools that have announced and are already in process of returning students to campus, and some are completely remote, but there are a lot that have returned their students to campus. Most of those, if not all, that have made those decisions, excuse me, have said they get to Thanksgiving, no fall break. You get to Thanksgiving, everybody goes home. Nobody comes back until after January 1, maybe even mid to late January. Mm-hmm. And so that they don't go home for Thanksgiving for one weekend, and then come back and bring back maybe something that they picked up along the way.
Sure.
So they're going to send everybody home for that period of time. So that creates a window for college basketball to exploit with the possibility of conference bubbles. I think that that's the way to go, rather than to try to create some sort of non-conference thing. I think you want to get league competition done as much as possible. So I believe that, and plus it's easier to design that bubble when you're all in part of the same group. So I think that they all should consider creating bubbles in whatever venue, city, whatever is best for them. For instance, here in Indianapolis, we have multiple multi-court facilities, and the saying here in Indiana is we grow basketball here. And if you ever saw some of the great gyms that they have with 6, 8, 10, 14 courts, that a lot of the AAU tournaments in the spring and summer are played.
Yep.
And so you could bring the Big East here or the Big Ten here and go to one of those venues and just keep playing. I think that that's something that should be considered. It would be good for television. It would be good for the conferences, and it would be good to get those games contested so that when the NCAA does have a tournament, and as I said, I have no doubt they'll have one. When they do have a tournament, you've put together some results that will qualify your teams to be part of that competition.
What are your expectations exactly for the season in the event that we do see college basketball this upcoming year as it pertains to the Big Ten? Because I mentioned a couple guys that are already coming back. I know that Maryland obviously is losing Jalen Smith, Stick Smith. I would imagine that Archie is kind of under a little bit of pressure, at least. At IU, I know Isaiah Livers is coming back to Michigan, and Juwan Howard has been doing a great job recruiting, even if he hasn't necessarily landed all of the guys that he would wish to have landed. Josh Christopher, amongst some others, Isaiah Todd, and so forth. But you have guys coming back to Minnesota. Ohio State struggle with a guy transferring, a couple guys transferring, that is, anyways. Purdue struggle with some guys with Harms transferring. Rutgers arguably is going to, after finishing very strong, they're going to look to try and capitalize on a strong year, much like Wisconsin is trying to do the same thing by surprising a lot of people with winning and sharing the Big Ten this past year. What are the expectations that you have in where the Big Ten will measure up with other conferences, considering all of those teams and what they'll have returning?
Yeah, last year was an amazing year to be an analyst on Big Ten Network. The league was incredible. So there was a great game almost every day of the week, usually more than one. It was as deep a conference numerically as there has been, because they didn't have any really dreadful teams. They had usually even the teams at the very bottom were competitive. And then you got to the middle of February and you still had 12 teams that had a chance to make the NCAA tournament. And when you looked at around Selection Sunday, I do the bracket projections for Fox Sports. And
correct.
And when I did my final bracket in advance, on the morning I was traveling from Chicago, where I did a BTN studio in the tournament for the first night before it was canceled. And then I arrived in Indianapolis that morning. I presented my final, not what I didn't know was my final bracket, but what became my final bracket for Fox. And there were 10 Big Ten teams on it. And if you look at the consensus on bracket matrix, 100 brackets that they consider, the consensus had 10 Big Ten teams in the tournament. And I didn't think that college basketball would see another year like that. And maybe from a depth standpoint, it isn't quite to that level. But from an excellence standpoint, relative to the rest of the college basketball world, I think the Big Ten is going to be better. Illinois is loaded now. Wisconsin brings back almost their entire roster. Michigan State brings back, obviously loses huge in Cassius Winston, a two-time All-American. And Xavier Tillman was a big loss as well, but one that they had planned pretty well for. And so Michigan State's going to find a way to be terrific. And Iowa brings back Luka Garza, who was the Sporting News Player of the Year for 2019-20. And obviously, like you said, will be projected by just about everybody to be it for next year to win the Rupp and the Wooden and the Oscar Robertson Trophy and the Naismith, et cetera. So that it's just so many really strong teams that I think that the season could maybe even in some ways surpass what we saw last winter.
Wow, that's crazy to even think about that, because in a year where it was like the Big Ten was almost like, you know, it was must-see basketball. That's just what it was. You know, there was no game that you can count out any team, and you weren't really sure who was going to win, whether it was home court, on the road, whatever the case may be. I got to make sure I show some love to a couple of my buddies who are probably watching, because I didn't mention Penn State, and the year that they had last year was absolutely phenomenal, getting all the way up to number 9 in the country before they started dwindling down a little bit towards the tail end. And the thing that I hate about it the most, but still loved about it, was that there was no clear-cut favorite last year. There was nobody that you could absolutely say. I mean, even Kansas, who looks like they were going to be the overall number 1 seed, probably didn't seem like they didn't have flaws or anything like that. So I really hate that we missed out on that part. Really quickly, we had a guy that actually chimed in, Matthew Maurer, over there on Facebook or on YouTube as well. It says, my man, Mike DeCourcy. So Mike definitely, of course, getting some love from some of the viewers here on Tate's Take, where basketball lives. Just one or two more things for you, Mike, is of a few things that I was actually curious to know about the basketball season in general is, you know, I had Jay Billis on a couple of days ago, and we were having a conversation in regards to how getting paid for the name, image, and likeness, and pairing that versus what the G League could offer players. What kind of effect does one have on the other with having that opportunity? And is there one that kind of players you would imagine would favor a little bit more? Because as much as we thought that the hottest thing smoking and out is that the G League, that Jalen Green and amongst other guys were taking advantage of, yet still now with the name, image, and likeness, guys might be actually considering, I might want to stick around in college because I want to be able to enjoy that atmosphere, enjoy that experience. You only get a chance to do college once at that age anyway. And still be able to make a little bit of money. Is that realistic? How do they affect each other?
Well, I think that when name, image, and likeness comes in, I think the deals that will be available, and I'm not talking about schools buying players. I'm talking about like Amani Bates. If and it should be, it absolutely should be. If NIL is in place when Amani Bates arrives in college, Amani's going to be able to make a ton of money, or should be able to make a ton of money, depending on what sort of structure the NIL circumstance would be for college athletes. There shouldn't be anything that would prevent him from making a lot of money. And the thing that I always point out is that whereas Zion Williamson lost out some on not being able to cash in on his name, image, and likeness while in college, what college did for his name, image, and likeness rights subsequently was absolutely nuclear. I mean, it made him a national superstar.
It did.
And so as a result of that, he was worth that much more. I mean, he would have, if he had gone directly to professional basketball, he would have not only been drafted in a reasonable position, he would have also made a fair amount of money, but not what he made after 1 year in college basketball. So I think that athletes will see that, and I think that they'll see that relative to the pathway option, college basketball is superior in every respect, except in the respect that you have to go to class. And at least in terms of, for those who don't really like the idea of going to class,
sure,
it's a requirement. But to me, it's also a bonus because I think that it's good to learn stuff. So I think that option is going to become less appealing. Honestly, DeShaun, I don't have any problem with paying young players out of high school, whatever you want to pay them, to go and play in the G League. I don't think that a lot of people would want to do it. I think that the development of the pathway program is proof they don't want to do it. But I'm not a fan at all of paying Jalen Green and company $500,000 to go and play exhibition games. Not because but because I don't think it's good for them in terms of their development as players. They don't have to compete. They just have to play. And I don't think that's not how you become great. You become great by having to compete for minutes, by having to compete for a role. If I want to be the guy, I got to show I'm the guy. You know, Zion Williamson didn't walk into Duke expecting to be the guy, but he competed his tail off and became that guy. And so that's something that I think is missing from the pathway plan. And as a result, I believe that once NIL is in place, the college basketball development experience becomes superior in every way to every other venue. It should be more lucrative than it is for the elite prospect. It will be more lucrative than it is. And then you have the lucrative element as well as the development aspect of it, the competition. You get better by defeating those who are less gifted than you. That's how and by showing that you're more gifted than the also gifted. That's how you get better.
Absolutely.
That's how it's always been. And Michael Jordan, when he was a freshman, was not a superstar. Once he got a chance as a sophomore, he was. That's how, he made that shot and the light went on. I was around Kenyon Martin for 4 years. Kenyon Martin was a fine college basketball player for 3 years, a fine player. Everybody would want him on their team. Great kid, hard worker, but didn't know how good he was and didn't accept how good he was. And then he went to the World University Games tryouts before his senior year, looked around the gym and said, I'm better than everybody here.
Yeah.
What if I saw him after he got back, and he was on the Naismith Award nomination list in November of his senior year. And I went to practice one day at Cincinnati, and I showed him the paper, and I showed him, what do you think? And he said, I'm going to win that award. And you saw what happens after that. He became the number one player in the draft, the unanimous player of the year, made something like $100 million as a pro, played in 2 NBA finals. All that comes about because you learn how to conquer competition. And I don't think that you get that by not playing in college, by playing in G League pickup games. You could get that if you went and played for the Erie Bayhawks. You got to beat some really good guys, and you got to get the ball away from some guys who maybe don't want to give it to you. But you could do that. It'd be hard, but you could if you're good enough. But I don't think you get that hanging around LA and dribbling through cones.
Kmart being a guy who's a very interesting guy, yet very nice guy. Not exactly sure how things are going to pan out exactly with his son, who's entering the NBA draft this year, oddly enough, after going through some different things. However, nonetheless, that'll be interesting enough in itself. And just like you said, the paveway plan to the G League almost sounding very much to be like how easy it is for players to transfer, because people don't really have to worry about competing with one another anymore for a spot. So it almost just kind of reminds me way too much about how easy it is to get out of a marriage or something like that, for whatever reason that is. I've never been married, so I don't know much about it. But what I will say is that my very last thing for you here, and I appreciate you giving us this time. I want to get you up out of here. I don't mean to take up too much of it, but the last thing that you mentioned was involved Michigan State and Imani Bates. Do you think that we will see Imani Bates in a green and white uniform? There's been some conversations about him potentially reclassifying. Whether he does or doesn't, do you think that we will see him in a Michigan State basketball uniform? Because I will say one thing, as much as I am, people are going to say, oh, you're a Michigan State homer because I'm from Lansing and so forth. But I'm really curious to know how this whole thing will unfold and unravel, because that puts, realistically, at least for me anyways, Tom Izzo in a different conversation as to where he becomes more at that point like Coach Cal and Coach K, where you have to produce and win those championships when you go and get the best talent. And as we've seen with the last handful of years or so, the the teams with the best talent per se in those one and dones haven't been cutting down nets and standing on ladders with scissors in their hands. Do you think we'll see him in a green and white uniform for Michigan State? And do you think Tom Izzo will get another national championship before he hangs it up?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether he does reclassify, and the reason I'm not as convinced that he will is because of his father's decision to start the prep school team, whatever you want to call it, in
Ypsilanti.
In Ypsilanti, that's what I thought it was. Yeah, that decision might lead to them having him remain in high school basketball for another year, as well as the fact that by remaining, he gets two chances. One, the NIL window would have to be open by the time he gets out. Whether or not it's open by fall of 2021, I hope so. Boy, I hope so, but I don't know. If it isn't, then it certainly will by the fall of 2022. As well as if there is a move in terms of the draft and the age limit going away, again, that would be in place if it happens no sooner than 2022. I don't right now think that we're heading in that direction. I think we're delayed if it's not altogether removed as an option. But staying in high school another year gives him a chance to wait for those two windows to be open. However, if we do find out in January that NIL is now a possibility for him when he enrolls, then it may accelerate the plan, because there's a lot of money that would be available in going to Michigan State, taking advantage of NIL, playing that season, and then entering the draft. So all of that comes into what the developments are between now and then. But I if you ask me what I think is more likely, I think it's more likely he will play at Michigan State at some point, whether it's 21 or 22.
Michael DeCourcy does stuff for Fox Sports. He's doing it all. He's doing college basketball columnist for Sporting News, as well as studio analyst for Big Ten Network, the whole nine. I really, really appreciate it. I want to send you tons of gratitude and just I'm very, very thankful and very grateful that you've been able to join me here today. And very happy, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
Yeah, and DeShaun, I'm really hopeful that someday we get through all this awful disease and get a chance to hang out some again in the future, because I miss that so much, getting together with everybody who loves basketball as much as we do, and there. So a chance to converse a little bit and talk about the game we love so much.
I would be delighted and looking forward to that next opportunity. Mike DeCourcy, everybody. Follow him on social media, on Twitter, at TSN Mike. That is at TSN MIKE. Does outstanding work for all of those different platforms, all of those guys. He does such a great job. Watch him on the regularly. We're always kind of texting and tweeting back and forth, talking about basketball, and a very, very good guy as well. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thanks, DeShaun.
That was Mike DeCourcy, and I appreciate everybody for joining in and having the opportunity to see that we trying to pick his brain a little bit, learning a lot about the football side, which I'm not exactly thrilled about, but whatever. But however, it's important to educate the people. That's what we're here to do. We're here to educate the people. We're here to inform the people. The best, not just the best, and the most entertaining and the most informational, the most educational basketball content in the form of a podcast. But we even sneak some football in there a little bit from time to time, as we talked a lot about the Big Ten, and talked a little bit about guys entering the NBA draft and pulling themselves from the NBA draft, maybe what the Big Ten is going to look like next season, and so forth, in the event that we do have the opportunity to see some basketball being played, and even maybe what it looks like if we see some football being played. So I definitely want to make sure I get on there because I had a couple people, obviously Matthew Maurer, who wants to come back on. I know that he wants to chime in with us here for a second. He's checking us out, as you can see on the bottom right-hand corner of his particular avatar or profile picture. You see that little red square with another little white square in the middle of it, and then he's got the little red triangle in the middle of it. That is the YouTube icon. He's subscribed to Tate's Take, where basketball lives, where you get the best basketball content. You can do the same thing. You can be just like Matthew, who says, if football happened in the spring, does it really make sense if potential NBA draft prospects opt out and prepare for the for the NFL draft? Got basketball in my head. Go figure. That'll surprise everybody. I'm not sure the answer to that question, if I'm just being honest with you. How much sense does it really make? Some of these guys are saying, I'm just going to jump ship so I can go and play right now, and I don't mess up my eligibility for the draft, because while a lot of guys in basketball are reclassifying so that they can become rich and millionaires 365 days earlier, you don't want to be like some of these other players who unfortunately have been affected and hit by the COVID and now not going to have a chance to play football. And then now they're not going to be millionaires until likely 365 days after. So it's wacky the way that a lot of that stuff works out. And I'm not really all that great in math anyways. Last thing that Matthew Maurer, appreciate him for chiming in again as well, says, I think Bates potentially makes more money with the NIL, that being name, image, and likeness, than he does the G League. And I think that he has a very, very good point with saying that. Now, I don't know if Matthew is a Spartan. I don't know if he wants to see him play college basketball, much like I do, let alone for Michigan State or for whomever state. I just want to see the kid play college basketball because I love college basketball, and I love to see him participate and exercise that right and to compete in that type of atmosphere and that type of setting. I just think that it'll be super dope and super awesome. In conclusion, want to remind the people to go ahead and subscribe, share it. I dare you to share this podcast. We've brought on so many really good guests. We've brought, not to be the name dropping guy, but it's okay to be proud of yourself sometimes for your efforts. We brought on Mike DeCourcy today. We've brought on Rick Kamler to talk about the NBA. We've talked from NBA Radio, Sirius XM. We've brought on Jared Greenberg on just yesterday from a reporter from NBA TV doing interviews on TNT, who's living right there within the bubble for 3 months. We brought on Jay Billis to talk about some college basketball. Magic Johnson's brother Larry Johnson came on. We're getting former players, we're getting coaches, athletes, the whole nine, you name it. You can find it right here. So you really don't know exactly who's going to be up next. The only way to find out exactly who that is, to find out who's going to be a guest here on Tate's Take, where basketball lives, to make sure you do your part and subscribe. And it's not a bad thing just by sharing it. All you got to do is hit that little button that says share, or hit the little button that says subscribe, and share it out to some of your friends and family if you enjoy this particular broadcast and this podcast, which I'm always grateful and thankful that you do, because I tell you what, when you do that, you are giving somebody, this young man right here, an opportunity to live out his dream and all of his aspirations, and to achieve the things that he's always wanted to achieve in life. At Tate's Take Hoops on the Twitter, as well as on the IG, Instagram, the Gram, TATESTAKEHOOPS, hashtag where basketball lives, anywhere you find your favorite podcast, that being Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Red Circle, wherever you find your favorite. There's no excuses, no exceptions. So if you got the iPhone, but if you don't have an Android, but you have an iPhone, you can go and subscribe and share that way. If you got the iPhone and not the Android, or vice versa, there's no excuse. You go on there, you share it with your friends, takes just a couple seconds. And I'm always very, very thankful and appreciative for anybody that goes above and beyond and does that. big, huge solid for me because I'm always thankful for that. So in closing, we'll be back with another podcast. I think this is going to be on Saturday morning, 9, 10 Eastern Standard Time. Go ahead, check it out. Set a reminder. Looking forward to it. I won't tell you who's going to be on because I want that to be a surprise, but I really think that you guys will enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe and follow at Tate's Take Hoops, TATESTAKEHOOPS, where basketball lives.